Welcome, everybody. I'm Eric Sy, Executive Director of the Fund for Lake George, and it is my great pleasure to introduce you to this very, very special event. First, I want to thank you for the tremendous response to our invitation. We have over 120 registrants from all over the region and the state, from Lake George to Schroon Lake, Lake Clear to Lake Erie, Port Chester to Tonawanda, and many more. Joining us are municipal leaders, highway superintendents, state officials, businesses, and nonprofits. We're so excited to have you here. You won't be disappointed. The morning features a powerful new film, the Roadmap to Road Salt Reduction, Success Stories from Lake George. For those of you who don't know the fund, we're a science-guided advocacy organization, and we employ partnerships, innovation, and direct investment, over $9 million since 2013, to solve mounting threats to the lake. Road salt is one of our top priorities. Why? It's a nationwide crisis. It's considered to be the acid rain of our time. Every year, a staggering 48 billion pounds of salt is applied on roads across the country. And Lake George is by no means immune to the exponential growth in road salt use. An estimated 15,000 metric tons annually are applied to roadways, and we can double that when including private surfaces, driveways, sidewalks, parking lots. So combined, that's enough salt to fill 300 rail cars or a train over 3 miles long every single year. The impacts are increasingly clear as well as severe to water quality, the environment, and our economy. Salt levels in Lake George are 30 times higher than undeveloped Adirondack lakes, and in our streams as much as 200 times higher. However, here's the good part. Unlike acid rain, we can solve this issue here and now. We have the technology, as they say. At Lake George, we're doing just that, town by town, lane mile by lane mile. And as you will see in the film, over the past 6 years, we have worked closely with Lake George municipalities to employ well-known, but too often not applied best practices. Using salt smarter, coupled with more effective equipment and tracking techniques, this is the recipe for reduction, as well as protection of our resources. And the results speak for themselves. Numbers don't lie. The town of Hague in northern Lake George, you're going to see it featured in the film, is a leading example. They've achieved 50% reductions and more in salt use, as well as 45% reductions in the town's annual winter maintenance budget. These are real numbers. They're making a real difference, and the results are delivering lasting returns for our environment and our economies. Most important, though, these successes can be yours or anyone's, delivering similar results anywhere. So again, I want to thank you so much for joining us this morning. Together, we'll reduce salt use at the scale demanded, an achievement for which future generations will surely thank us. Just a quick footnote before we begin. Immediately following the film, which goes about 30 minutes, we'll be joined by some of our experts, Chris Navitsky, the Lake George Waterkeeper, Phill Sexton, a partner, WIT Advisers, working with us to implement the program, to answer your questions. Questions will be submitted by using the chat function at the right side of your screens. So have a look. John Brott of BN Communications, another partner, will be moderating this Q&A session. So without any further ado, get comfortable and enjoy the show.
Hi there, so glad that you have joined us as we are here to talk about our road salt reduction initiative that we've been doing here at Lake George. As we all know, the chloride levels in Lake George have tripled over the past 40 years, but in streams such as this, they increase by 150 times during storm events, and even of greater impact are impacts to our groundwater, where we know now that wells are contaminated. This has all been found through studies funded through the Fund for Lake George, and we're here to talk to you about what 3 local municipalities and agencies have done to help reduce road salt through the practice of brining, or what we call anti-icing. You'll learn about how these departments and these operators have taken it on themselves to learn about brining, to learn about the science of brining, and to learn how that really has helped the bottom line in economics in their own townships and counties. If you're interested in this subject, we encourage you to speak with these municipalities, learn about it, and learn how you can protect your own communities and protect important resources like we are here doing at Lake George.
Years ago, what we did was we primarily used sand. It was a year-long process. Dan would go over to our sand pit and he would dig out of the bank and he would take and dump that on a screening plant and produce sand. Screen out all the rocks and the pebbles, not that you ever get them all out. And he would work on this all summer long. So then when there was a break in time, the other crew members, they'd haul that sand over to our bulk pile. And then what happened from there was when we got actually into winter, we actually used pickups. And up to 3 inches, we would plow roads with pickups. And then we'd have a separate truck that they would dump the sand into the separate truck. We used very little chlorides or salts at that point, just enough, but usually about 10%. And what that would do is that would just basically, so the salt didn't freeze, it didn't clump, so it would come out the conveyor chain of the truck. And then once we got up above 3 inches, we had another plow truck, a bigger plow truck with a wing, high-speed plow, these big curl plows that would come and remove the material. So they would keep round after round after round, because we didn't use much de-icers. They would go in and basically just continue doing this until the storm's over or it came to a good friction level. So springtime would happen. So what would happen at that point? The entire crew would go out with specialized equipment, street sweepers, about $5,000 worth of consumables, brooms, blowers, and about a month and a half worth of time, and they would go and try to sweep all that sand that they put out. So then, after this came, we said, well, there's gotta be a better way. There's gotta be a different way of doing this. So we started looking towards sustainable, partnered with the fund. We started looking out towards the Midwest to see what they're doing, because they're years ahead of us. And there's other ways we can do. Started looking into liquid de-icers. We couldn't afford machines like this, or didn't have the funding for it. So we made our own.
The brine thing it interested me, and so I just started looking into it, and we actually started building our own brine maker down there with a 3 or 4 55-gallon barrels.
We had a bunch of plastic 55-gallon drums, an agitator, a garden hose, and we made our own brine maker. So now we had to figure out how we're gonna put it on the road. So we had an old tank with a pump on it that we used to use to water the flowers in the park. So we adapted this so we could put it down on the road. Some basic math, figured it out, and it worked.
We just kind of went into it blind and used the science of what we had and found that it was working out.
We had one tall tale sign that really did work. We had an ice storm years ago, about 6 years ago. We knew this ice storm was coming. It was going to be really bad. So we fired up our 55-gallon drum, brine maker, and our applicator. We just kept making it, and we went round and round and round with these liquid de-icers until the point we actually had to go out with our big trucks. But that was the tall tale sign, because we were the only municipality all around us that got hit with this ice storm. That school opened that day.
I think the brine, when we can apply it, works well. It buys us time, depending on the event, whether it's a flurry or a dusting of snow. We generally don't have to send a plow truck out. You know, some of our roads are different because we have such an elevation range. You know, the higher elevations we may have to plow, but I've seen with my own eyes where we have not had to send a crew out because we pre-treated the roads with a dusting and even a slight drizzle.
Change is always a little difficult. A new culture is always a little difficult. But I certainly have seen a change in people jumping on board and trying to understand it. We have Rob Vlaopoulos, who has taken it to another level as far as understanding the IT side of it and how to operate everything. And he's really has helped us and helped us create enthusiasm and a culture up there.
Robbie V took a real interest in the program, and he has some acute computer skills. So he got interested in the program. He started collecting data. It wasn't too long after he got started in this whole thing, he had a notebook with pictures and notes and everything. He would run his software, keeping track of the temperature and all the things they were doing. So he really got a handle on the whole procedure and what it was all about, technically. And that really, really worked out to the benefit of the town.
All these are tools in a huge toolbox, so it's really picking the right tool for the right job. We like to say we're putting the right material in the right place at the right time. Are we having an ice storm? Are we going to start using a little bit more sand? We need a friction adder. Is the temperature going to be way up? Are we going to be able to anti-ice beforehand? Regular sodium chloride brine will basically take care of up to 1/4 inch. We may not even need to go out. So if we don't have to go out and we don't have to have all our operators come in and we don't have that huge cost of running these trucks, of operator's wage, of consumables. So it's a huge savings depending on what job it is.
So the more brine we can use without wasting it is the best possible answer. I like it. I've seen it with my own eyes work. That sold me.
We eventually approached 50% savings in our salt usage, which is a lot. I mean, we order tons and tons and tons of salt every year. So 50% was a very noticeable milestone, and that's the thing that I think got everybody excited. And once we started talking about the guys in the DPW started talking with the other DPW guys, oh, we saved 50% on the salt. Well, they go, oh, wait a minute, well, what are you doing? So it really promoted the program and it really took off.
As a business owner and seeing the positive impact this has had on the town, we're excited to start using this on our properties. We have brine on site right now, and we're eager to start using it for this year.
There was a lot of skepticism with the public because they see you out there and in their mind they think you're spreading water and they don't understand that it's not going to freeze. They all thinking that it's going to freeze. What they didn't understand, once they did, then they kind of got on board themselves for the most part.
As the brine started going down and residents started seeing a change, we did get input. We got a lot of questions, and people were very positive that we were taking that initiative to reduce salt and save the lake and save the taxpayer money.
We also invested in computerized application systems. This controls our granular application. This by far will control the application rate better than any operator will. So if we set this, say, at 150 pounds per lane mile, this, through a ground speed sensor, will constantly adjust to maintain that 150 pounds per lane mile. We also put pre-wet systems on our trucks. All de-icers need moisture to start to work. So what we're doing is we're providing that moisture, essentially jump-starting the process. So we have more material on the road in the right place, and it starts working faster. So what you see here is the back of the truck. In some trucks, this one, the material actually exits the rear of the truck. This is the auger train that the granule material actually rides on at a set rate because of our computerized application system. It is set at a gate height. This gate height may change due to what material that we are dispensing out the truck. As the material falls out, it's sprayed with these nozzles here at a particular rate before it falls on the spinner. We do this because as this throws the material out, it actually helps eliminate the bounce and scatter. It also jump starts the entire process. So these saddle tanks that are on the side of the truck are actually loaded with liquid de-icer, a combination either sodium chloride de-icer or a mixture of whatever we decide to put in there to get the job done. Basically all this is a tank, goes through a set of valves and filters and gets pumped out with the pump, and that pump pushes it right out to those nozzles. We decided to use the Henderson system, but you really could do this yourself by just getting a tank, some basic hardware that you can get at the hardware store, $100 pump, and buying you some nozzles online. You could accomplish this yourself.
My advice to other highway departments is if they have any questions, they can call us, but try it, and try it in maybe some troubled areas or cold spots where you're sending a crew out, but you don't really need to because you pre-treated the day before during normal work hours.
You know, when we started, our highway superintendent was apprehensive. He really was. He was a little bit of a tough sell. Once he started, he ended up, by the time he retired, just spearheading this and really being a leader in this whole thing.
I was probably the biggest skeptic of all. The science, the people from the fund, Phill Sexton, everybody, I made them work for it. They convinced me. Once I was convinced, my guys were probably more receptive to it than I was. And the proof's there. You just got to look at it.
I said, if you want to save 50% of your salt expenses, you need to do this salt abatement program. And there's a lot of funding out there to assist you with it. You just need to make the commitment to do it and get involved, and people will step up and help you.
If we're able to anti-ice, it usually eliminates a round of these trucks going out. So we eliminated the average man's wage, fuel consumption, consumables like cutting edges. We're no longer putting granular material or liquid material out on the road. It's a huge savings. It could save us over $500 per truck by eliminating that one round. So 4 to 5 trucks, we could be looking at a $2,500 savings just by eliminating the round. That's just this aspect of it. Not to mention the pickups that follow these trucks to plow intersections aren't going out for that extra round. The loader that would have had to reload these trucks, that's not running. So we essentially, by eliminating one round, we could save $2,500 to $5,000. Doing that over a season, you're talking huge savings, huge.
Now we have this town-fund relationship. The town and the fund have done several projects in the town. This partnership is great. A lot of times the fund will put up the funding and the town will put up the manpower and the trucks and whatever it takes to build whatever it is we're doing. It's been very successful. And the town's extremely pleased with it, and we're very happy to have the fund as partners.
Everybody's on board. Everybody, we live here. You know, we want to see a bright future for our children to actually grow up and experience the same things that we did. So we can do little things like this, because a lot of little things end up having a big result.
I think the program in the beginning was an unknown. Brining is a situation where some states use it and some states don't use it. And our guys would sit back and they were wanting to do the right thing for the town. They understood that the way they were doing it wasn't as beneficial for the environment and the lake. So they listened closely to what the village was doing down there. They listened to Phill and his program, and they grasped the importance and how it could help the residents of town, make it better for the lake, which is again the economic driving force for this whole region. They grasped it, took the ball and ran, and now people are coming to us and say, hey, can you hand us off some information?
We started off with these live edges first, and they wanted to control the amount of salt reduction that we were going to use to make our roads more safe and more operable for the driver, the community, and saving the environment. We got out, we got a chance to run this equipment to see how it worked. We played with it for 2 years. We couldn't believe the difference in between a straight edge plow versus a plow that actually moves and flexes with the road. It took us a while to understand the breakdown of how the salt reduction actually worked with the way it was melting the material off the road, and we're trying to prevent that bond layer. Once we understood the saturation levels of the salt and understanding how to prevent that bond layer, we were able to reduce our numbers by playing with the system, basically. We were learning how it actually works. Once we started understanding how it all breaks down and how it all comes to an effect, and started understanding the numbers and the saturation levels and the road temperatures and air temperatures, we started getting into making our own brine so we can reduce our numbers again. Everything's a numbers game for safety. It's about driver safety, the public safety, and everything else that's involved with it, along with the environment. Once we understood how to mix the brine at a different capacity, so to speak, to slow it down just a little bit and use the circulators better, we were able to fill up 4 other tanks in a day. So we had 18,000 gallons of brine made in 2 days. You start charging the numbers that they were running, which they're going to eventually switch to because transportation costs a lot of money to move this stuff back and forth. You're probably looking at $1.25 a gallon. One tank we made for $244, and we're doing it on hour, and it's all fitting into what we do for this operation. So within 2 days, for every tank, you save $4,000 for the town, your community, and the taxpayers, which is very important.
It's a combination of being proactive and not waiting till the storm hits and go, well, what do we do now? When we see the storm coming, the guys take the steps to go out and brine the road, so it makes it not as difficult to clean the road as it does in the past when you don't have it down. So, you know, in the past when we were using more salt, the storm would come and they would go over and start plowing, they'd load up some more salt, they'd come back, drop more salt. And it was a never-ending battle of trying to come up with the right mixture to keep the road safe for people, because again, we didn't have the expertise and the equipment to be able to monitor the salt, to have salt reduction, to keep the salt out of the lake. With the live edge plow, the controls in the trucks based on dispersing the salt, based on the speed of the truck. The trucks don't have to go fast. At a slow pace, they get the proper amount of salt on, so you're not overloading the road, you're not overloading the environment, hence you're not hurting the lake.
This here's our sand pile. With the amount of savings that goes into it and the saving of the basin, the brooks, and the streams, we haven't used sand in 3 years. That 3 year savings comes out to $10,000, looking at the numbers of putting it into your truck, springtime cleanup, buying brushes for your payloader to keep your streets clean. We haven't cleaned our streets in 2 years. We didn't have to because there was no excessive waste left on the road, and it stopped the ice pack, and when the storm is over, we're finished. We just go out for a patrol, check it, check our cold spots, check our icy spots to make sure the roads are still safe and bare for everybody to continue operating. This is probably 50% of all your problems with ice pack, if not a full 100%. And this is the part that people need to understand. All because of saturation, it absorbs it, it freezes, it doesn't allow the salt to do what it's supposed to do and create more work twice the amount of salt.
You know, they saw how it benefited the town roads, it benefited the safety of the town, it helped keep the lake at a level that we want to keep it at with less salt. So they took the initiative to do all of those steps and go forward with it. And we're real pleased with the leadership out there that they've exhibited working with the crews, and for the people of town are pleased also.
It's working. I kind of getting excited talking about it because it's all coming together. If you take the time to learn it, and it's not hard. It's not hard at all. It's a simple process. We were fortunate enough to grasp it. It was a challenge in some aspects. It was trial and error in the others. Once we started seeing the difference in the numbers and seeing how it was actually working, it pressed us to move further. It pressed us to use more. We have 3 tracking systems on our trucks now. We have cameras that are set up outside of the road thanks to the VIA system and Rakib. When the snow comes and we're waiting for that phone call, I jump on the Rakib's dashboard system here and I'm able to see the lines in the road, the material working. So we know that that bond layer is already being prevented. What we found with this pre-wet system is once that bond layer is prevented, you go out, you can minimize the amount of salt that you're going to use at your startup, and for the leftover material that doesn't break down, that you're just scraping right off the road. Yeah, it's incredible. We have a driver who was, I don't believe in it, and he just put the salt to it. We actually ran our numbers up one year. After we did the totals of all of our trucks and ran through all the numbers, we calculated that extra effort to being towards that one truck running at such a high rate. The second he got into the newer truck and started working the Dickie John system, he was like, I can't believe the amount of salt I was wasting. So once they get in it and they start using it and they start seeing the difference, along with the live edge plows, along with the data information that we got collected here, their mindset starts changing. But then they start playing with the numbers. They start going up and they start going down. And then they start learning on how they're going to operate on concentrated areas. They know their cold spots. They know where they're going to get excessive snow falling off the trees from leftover snow that's coming. And then you can tweak those efforts and make them more efficient. When it comes to the end of a storm, we're pretty much done. We could run out and run a pre-wet line over it if we wanted to, as opposed to doubling the amount of lane miles that we need to help clean up the roads and melt them faster. If you're willing to have a drive or determination, you could achieve certain things. And this is something that we're achieving. It's really simple. It's not as complicated as everybody thinks. And I think the fear is change. And to change, you have to show them what you've achieved. You have to show them your failure and your success. And that's what we've been doing. We've already been going town to town.
Our guys grasped the program, ran with it, and again, it made it better. And now we found towns are coming and asking our guys for help. So sharing this knowledge and how it benefits the residents of whatever town it could be and is paramount. And it helps protect our beautiful lake.
If you bring it forth to them and explain it to them and try to get them involved, you have to say something that's going to make them turn their heads. You have to make them stop, think, and look at our results compared to what they're doing now. The only way you can prove that is with facts and data. We have all that. We're taking these charts that we've created from this program, from the swim team and other teams, and we're making up our own charts, and we're implementing this all into a daily function. It's not only just about snow and ice. It goes into their daily routine of how we're going to run our operations. That's how much this program has changed us.
Once people look at this, ask questions and understand it, they'll ask more questions. Can it be beneficial for our town? How much money can we save by doing it this way? How much can we improve the quality of the lake? Can we reduce the salt content into the lake to make it a lake that is more viable and will continue to be viable for a long time?
We're going to take it to the next step this year. Now that we've understand the numbers, saturation levels, and temperatures, we're going to tie in our pre-wet system, which is going to allow us to run at more efficient numbers. And it's all about understanding that science. And it's really simple once it's laid forth to you. We're just trying to find another way to become more innovative to make it more operational and more safe. I got a drive in me. I want to help save the lake. I want to help save the environment. I want to help keep people safe. Those are our goals.
We got involved as a town to try and preserve the lake. There are various programs now to try and keep the lake clean, and we do understand that salt loading is a detriment to the lake. And of course, with the guys that are growing up here, most of them, they understand that also. And steps were taken with the help from the Fund of Lake George and other organizations to try and continue to keep the lake pristine. And we believe the guys have worked hard on that. And of course, they have been the recipient of the Swim Award, and we're awful proud of that.
The Highway Department oversees 250 miles worth of roads and 57 miles worth of bridges. That's to do paving maintenance in the summer months, and then in the winter months it's to do snow and ice removal. We have, in the past couple of years, taken on kind of new protocols that we haven't done in the past. Normally it was just for us to put salt on roadways, maintain bare roads within Warren County, and that's kind of a policy that was put in place many years before I ever started here.
If you put down salt on the road when it was clear, high traffic area, unless it was just before the storm came down and hit, obviously it would bounce off the road and it would clear it off, just traffic flying. So it was, I want to say, a very inefficient pre-treating system. With a brine system down, you have a security there. If it's been in place, that you know that you actually have an application down, and that gives you a little more time in that window getting trucks out to take care of the storm, the snow and ice activity.
One of our northernmost towns in the county, the town of Johnsburg, We had our crews put brine up there last year, and typically that's the spot in Warren County where the snow comes in first. The lake effect snow comes across, and those guys took our brine last year and used it on a couple different roads in Johnsburg. And we noticed that normally they were putting down about 400 pounds per lane mile of salt on those roads. They reduced it last year either 200 or below 200 by the use of putting the brine application down first.
It's the fact that you can get out ahead of a snow and ice event and have it pre-treated on the road, so that gives you a little more of a cushion as far as reaction time, and that first application doesn't have to be that heavy. That's the big thing as far as pre-treatment goes. You don't have to lay down so much salt in a storm. You may not have to put any down. If the brine does its job on a smaller event, you may not have to have anybody actually go out and take care of an event as far as the snow goes.
Everybody thought we did a good job by reducing salt, but we definitely know there's areas out there that we can reduce it more. We do know that there's little things that we can tweak on and get the operators and stuff on board with us a little more, and you're going to see a big difference. That's the big thing. You got to get the operators to believe in it. Once you get the belief, then we'll start reducing salt at a good rate.
I think the fund has provided the county with a lot of kind of the information needed for us necessarily to get started. They also helped us this past year with our first stationary brine making unit. They were able to fund it in its entirety for the county, and we received it back in September, and we've already filled up all our brine tanks for this year. So that was a huge help on their part. And we're on board with, it's not just the fund, it's all the environmental groups around the lake. We're not opposed to making sure that this lake is around for a very long time. We've also had a partnership with WIT and with WIT. They have assisted us with, number one, their knowledge, and that's been a huge help. I've also kind of given them leeway to talk with our staff, because sometimes coming from me, it may not be, hey, this is the right thing to do, but let somebody else tell them, saying we've done this. So that's been a huge help. They've also provided us some infrastructure in place as well for this. We've gotten cameras. We have cameras on, I believe, 5 or 6 roads now, hoping to get a couple more for this year.
The cameras did allow them, compared to past practice, was the only way to check on the road was to get up and actually physically check on the road, was past practice. Nowadays, like I said, with the cameras, and if you have the pre-treatment down, it physically, you can see where it's being effective.
That's a plus for my staff, because when they get up in the mornings, they can know that we're going to have snow coming in the night before. They can look at the camera and say, there's nothing on our roads. And especially if we use brine on all our roads. And I'm hoping with the data that we collect this year, it'll really show everyone else that it truly does work, that it's truly the model that everybody should be following. We're not the only state to try this. There's many areas. Even DOT, New York State DOT, uses brine now. They realize the benefits as well. But again, as I've always said, it's tough to convince smaller town guys who've been plowing for years that this truly does work. But yeah, my big dream this year is going to get projected onto everyone else going forward from here. We have such a beautiful area that we live in, and we know that salt has done damage to the lake, and it's not just Lake George. I'm sure if you could go to any one of the other lakes, it's done the same thing there. To me, it's to make sure that that stays the pristine beauty it is forever and ever.
Welcome back. Every time I watch that, I'm just so impressed by the pride that those guys show in their work, and rightly so. They do a great job. My name is John Brott. I'm with Bean Communications, and I work with the Fund for Lake George on community relations projects. Everyone at the fund hopes you enjoyed the film, that you learned a lot, and that just maybe we've helped inspire you to consider starting or expanding road salt reduction efforts in your community or your business. Before I forget, I do want to mention that we are recording this entire event, and we'll have it posted on the fund's website in the near future in case you wanted to revisit something, or you want to share the link with someone who couldn't be here because they were out plowing roads or something. I'm sure you also have some questions, so we're going to move into our Q&A session now, and we've assembled our expert panel here to talk with you. I want to welcome back Eric Sy, Executive Director of the fund. And joining Eric are Lake George Waterkeeper Chris Navitsky. The Waterkeeper is a program of the fund and also one of the fund's partners in the Lake George Road Salt Reduction Initiative, Phill Sexton. Phill is the CEO of winter management consulting firm WIT Advisers. As Eric noted earlier, at the right of your screen, you'll see a chat box through which you can submit any questions to the panel. I'll get those and read them to the group. We ask that you please include your name and affiliation so that we'll be able to reach out offline in case we need to follow up on something, give you more information, or we don't have time to answer everyone's questions in this session. So while you're submitting your questions, I guess I'll get the ball rolling. Chris Navitsky, you mentioned at the start of the film that chloride levels in Lake George, I think you said, have tripled over the past 40 years. Why should we care?
Well, thanks, John, and I'd like to say good morning to everybody. Well, road salt is a pollutant, and road salt primarily is sodium chloride, which we all have on our dinner tables. And when it breaks down in the environment after it is spread, that's when we really see the problems arise. So chloride does not interact with the organics or the other components in soils, and it will concentrate in our waters, in our groundwaters and in our surface waters. And since it does not dissipate, it can reach toxic levels that have been set by the EPA. And then it can start causing harm to our ecology, to our own health, as well as to our infrastructure. So there's significant problems that can come with that.
Of water quality monitoring on the lake and in its tributaries. What's the science telling us about the health of the lake these days?
Well, as we have stated, the chloride levels in Lake George have tripled over the past 40 years, but they remain below, the toxic levels. But in other Adirondack lakes, studies by our partners on Mirror Lake have shown that the chloride levels, when they start concentrating, create a denser water and they settle in our deeper waters. And that really prevents the natural turnover of lakes, which prevents the natural mixing of oxygen to really benefit our aquatic life. And as we stated, our data collection, chloride levels in our streams are 150 to 200 times higher than in the lake. And those can reach those toxic levels that impact the aquatic life. But maybe of a greater concern is the impacts to our groundwater. As we said, chlorides do not dissipate and they can build up in our groundwaters. And through studies by our partners at the Adirondack Watershed Institute, partially funded through the Fund for Lake George, they've actually seen that chloride levels in drinking wells of wells down gradient of state roads are actually, on the average, 80 times higher than natural background levels of wells not along roadways. And that can have other impacts as far as health and to infrastructure as well.
Great, thanks a lot, Chris. We got a flurry of questions coming in from the audience here, so I'm gonna jump over to those. We've got a question from Dale Root, who is asking about, and this is probably a question for Phill, I guess. Dale is asking about the chloride percentage in the brine, and how many gallons we're applying per lane mile.
Good question, Dale. So traditional sodium chloride brine, that's a 23.3% sodium chloride to water. And generally we're seeing it, I'll give it an average of say 45 gallons per lane mile. Generally we recommend people start at a little bit higher rate and so that they can get comfortable with it. And then I can tell you at least two of the municipalities you just saw in the film, they've been able to actually reduce it below that. So good question.
Great, thanks, Phill. And maybe I'll turn to Eric Sy. We've got a number of questions here, all on the same general topic, but people are interested in where New York State stands as far as road salt reduction on its highways, whether they're involved in this program, and how this program relates to the Adirondack road salt reduction bill that was passed late last year.
Sure. Thanks, John. Great question. Big question to be answered. But I'm happy to say that we have been working fist and glove with the state DOT. They have a pilot program as part of our work at Lake George along Route 9N. And they are all in, first of all, understanding the challenge we face and participating at the levels needed to ensure we make that difference, that we hit the threshold and reduce the volume of salt being applied statewide. They've also been a funder through grant programs supporting brine making equipment and paying close attention, participating in our annual salt summits. We've had 5 of those. DOT always has a major presence, state DOT. And this has gone right up to the commissioner, Commissioner Dominguez at DOT, who is so keen and has applauded our work. And we, in turn, have said how important it is to partner with the state, because unless we do this at all levels of government and across all sectors, we're not going to bring down that massive, staggering number that I mentioned earlier. So they're very much a participant in this important work.
Great, thanks, Chris. Maybe I'll jump back, I guess, to Phill for this one. Phill, Joanne Coons is doing some math here, and she's trying to calculate some potential savings and wants to know how large the brine mixing containers that we saw in the video were.
Oh, good question. A few of those you saw were at least 1,000 gallons, and most of them were 3,000 gallon capacity.
Great.
So I think
Thanks,
you're trying
Chris.
to figure out that $240 to make a tank. I'm willing to bet you heard Tim say from the town of Hague. So they're literally making it for cents versus that over $1 a gallon. So significant savings there if you can set up your own infrastructure.
Great.
And if I could just add to that, John, just quickly. One reason the fund made direct investments in brine making plants is because this is all about creating a durable infrastructure. We are on track to reducing the use in the Lake George Basin by a total of 50%. We already have towns doing that, demonstrating it's eminently doable with the savings they're incurring in the process. So the more we do to establish this as the new way of being efficient and effective, a new culture of winter road management, the longer this is going to last. This will be the way of the future.
Great, thanks, Eric. I think I'll throw it back to Phill. Phill, you're a popular guy. Someone is asking about the road and weather monitoring technology that's being used both along the roads and in the cabs of the plow trucks. Can you give us a quick overview of what's being done there?
Sure. I'll start with the road weather systems. They're completely wireless, solar powered, and they're actually connected to a cellular signal, which if you thought about it in terms of a highly sophisticated trail cam, I don't want to minimize it, but it can measure air temperature, surface temperature, has a lens heater on it, and it actually feeds information back to the cloud, and we can see both real-time and archived information coming from those cameras. So if you want to, we generally have them ping about every 10 to 15 minutes. So we want at least 4 pictures an hour, and just to see current conditions. And then we match that up with road surface and air temperature conditions. And then that is actually related then to salt application totals that we see from the trucks. So those trucks are GPS enabled salt trackers. So we're generally counting ticks in the truck, and those ticks are calibrated to a specific rate that we help train operators how to do that. And then so we can actually see per application the amount of salt output going down on the roads and what type of level of service or conditions it's achieving. And this is all again fed to the cloud, which then we behind the scenes monitor and help to assess where the continuous improvement opportunities exist.
Great, thanks, Phil. Chris, jumping back to the results of the program or the impacts of the program, are there impacts to the environment in our communities other than water quality impacts?
Yeah, one of the things I think that everybody notices are the brown needles and, the burn that we see on our pine trees, which really is a result of the road salt spray. But when you think about it, you don't see what's really happening down in our soils. Road salt was used as a preservative long before refrigeration, and so it really kills bacteria. But as we add road salt to our environment, that is actually impacting the microbial action and the microbiology in our soils, and really impacting the health of our soils and impacting, our ecology. Furthermore, as I stated, chloride levels in Lake George remain low on the toxic level. But when you think about the sodium levels at the current rate that we're seeing in the lake, those levels in 20 years, people with sodium restricted diets will not be able to drink water from the lake. So clearly that's an impact to the community. And lastly, we talked about the way the chlorides are increasing in our groundwater, impacting our wells. So residents that actually have drinking water, take their drinking water from wells, are seeing corrosion in their appliances, seeing corrosion in their heating systems, as well as potential health impacts from leaching of lead coming out from older pipes. So really, these are all cumulative impacts that we are seeing beyond just to the environment.
Great, thanks. Eric, I'm going to jump back to you. This is a good one. We've got a question from Paul Quirini. I apologize if I'm not pronouncing that right, Paul, but Paul describes himself as a Lake George tourist. So thank you for joining us this morning and for your interest in the lake. Paul is asking if other municipalities along Lake George are looking at salt reduction other than the 3 featured in the film. And what about other North Country communities across the Adirondack Park?
Sure. Well, it's important to note, Paul, and thanks for the great question, that this program began with the engagement of all the municipalities around the lake. In fact, all of them signed an MOU, a memorandum of understanding. This was integral to creating the foundation for the process, that committed to, not financially, but to reducing the use of road salt, understanding all of the impacts Chris is so clearly pointing to, and that we should all be concerned about. So what we did in this film was simply to feature highlights. Others are on the track. Nobody's moving at the exact same pace. There's a learning curve here. As I said, there's a culture change. So having Warren County as a lead horse will really help ensure that everybody participates to the degree we need in the basin and beyond, because Warren County extends beyond the Lake George Basin. But in creating this new culture, in creating this new expectation of how we're going to keep our winter roads clear and safe, But beyond Lake George, certainly. I mean, we have, as I mentioned at the beginning, we have folks on this in this meeting, this event, from all over the region, and they're learning so that they can do it. And to that end, DOT is also participating in a pilot project up near Lake Placid and is partnering with interests there, including at the municipal level. So we like to think of Lake George as leading by example. We don't have all the answers for sure. We're learning as we go, and we want to share our progress with anybody and everybody who's interested, given the stakes and given the need.
Thanks, Eric. I'm just going to stick with Eric for a minute for a follow-up. What about the private sector? Is there a role for them in this effort?
Sure, critically. As research has shown us, as much as or even more perhaps of the salt volume that's being applied in excess is coming from the private sector. It's more difficult to certainly to regulate, to monitor, and to track over time. So it's critical, and part of our program at Lake George, and you heard from Vinny Cressito, who's a business owner. We have a council of business advisors at Lake George, and we're working closely with them to prepare them and equip them to be leaders in their own right, to show what's possible in the private sector, because this is an all-in, all-out effort. It's not going to be simply reducing the use on our roads. It's everything, as stated, from sidewalks. Parking lots are a huge contributor. And I'm going to lob it over to Phill, because Phill has a lot of firsthand experience working with the private sector.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. And I think, yeah, it's important to state, I mean, the reason we initially developed the entire sustainable winter management program and those guidelines is because of the private sector's, really copious use of salt. I mean, if you relate this to Lake George and even another like Mirror Lake, in Mirror Lake, interestingly enough, there's been a lot of studies done there where most of the impervious surface runoff actually is coming from parking lots, not from as much as from roads. If you think about Lake George, the extreme increase in chloride loading over the years really is, you could sort of point that back to where's all the development happened. There hasn't been one new road put in since the 80s when chloride started being measured. So it only stands to reason it's where it's been developed. So, I'm personally a snow and ice contractor by trade. I'm also a researcher by education and training who has studied this very broadly for the past decade, including a 2-year Harvard research thesis that I did on this topic, specific to the use of road salt by the private industry. And something you could Google, anybody could Google this. If you Google like New Hampshire salt research, you'll find that a lot of research that originally pointed to what do we need to do this on the road surface, a lot of the research points back to 50% or more of the issue is really coming from private parking lots and private roads. And so it stands the reason, because if you sort of thought about this example, pick any sort of commercial district in North America, anywhere where you live, anywhere where you shop for groceries, anywhere where you shop for any kind of retail setting. If you can imagine 1 lane mile of road, and then the equivalent of a lane mile. So lane mile road is truck goes down the road, truck comes back the other side of the road. If you think about that, and then think about an acre of parking lot being equivalent. So most retail parking lots are 5 acres or more. A lot of them are 10. There's many large grocery chains that we work with that are 30 acres in some cases. So imagine that. So for every lane mile of road in a typical commercial setting, you could have 50 lane miles, or in some cases, hundreds of lane miles of parking lot. So it just stands to reason, again, that that's where a lot of this salt could be coming from.
Great, thanks, Phill and Eric. Phill, there were a couple of references in the film to the Sustainable Winter Management certification that the 3 municipalities have earned. Can you just give us a brief overview of what's that all about?
Sure. Well, I think, first and foremost, the certification, I think, is important primarily as both a recognition and an accountability that, the holistic program or standards of policy that enable best practices are being followed by, these organizations. And so, what we do is we first start with, I think Eric spoke to it best. It really starts with culture change, though. Do the folks that are putting the salt on the ground even know that there's a problem with this? And then when we get into it, then we start to think about what are the standards of policy. And we look at it in simple terms as, first you have to measure. If you don't measure what you want to improve, it won't happen. And so measuring is what starts first. And that's why you see the salt trackers in the trucks, and that's why you see the cameras on the road. So we have to be able to measure how salt's being applied, and we have to measure the level of service that's being achieved. And then we get into things like calibration, prevention of the bond is a big issue that you heard in the film, and that's where Brian is starting to actually help enable that to be optimized. And then we get into this analysis of the data, improvement and optimization. And so these municipalities that you heard from today, I mean, these folks are heroes in more ways than one. I mean, they're heroes in just what they already do day to day, but then they're also heroes to take that what they do, which is, traditionally a fairly dangerous job. Can you imagine being on these slick roads at 2 o'clock in the morning, going up and down these mountains? And now I also have to figure out how to tweak my application rate. That's no easy task. And so with all the technology available to them, it still requires accountability. It still requires culture change. And so that's why the certification matters. So we're able to recognize when they're following all of the guidelines, we monitor that, and then we improve upon it. And that's probably the biggest piece of this that's different than, I think, probably any other traditional certification model. Is it's less about the certification and it's more about the continuous improvement. As long as you're continuously improving rates, continuously improving practices, that's how you maintain that certification. So I'm very proud of those that have done so.
Great, thanks, Phill. We are rapidly coming up on our 1 hour time here. It's approaching 11:30. Eric, I wanted to, I was going to throw it back to you for your closing comments. I do want to mention there was a period there where questions were coming in kind of hot and heavy on the chat. If I missed or overlooked your question, we'll try to take a look at that offline here and circle back to anyone that we missed. One of the questions I know was how the Lake George Salt Reduction Initiative can help or be of help to other communities. So maybe Eric, I'll toss it back to you for that and your closing comments. And I know you also wanted to mention another exciting salt-related event coming up later this year. So I want to thank everybody for taking the time to join us, and I'll throw it back to Eric.
Thank you so much, John. And thank you, Chris and Phill. And thank you to all our participants and your great questions. And no, we did not get to them all, but there's going to be plenty of opportunity to follow up. But as far as what we're doing at Lake George can help, well, number one, this film is ready-made to share. Number two, the people who are participating here at Lake George are ready to share their experience firsthand, either by meeting virtually for a more informed interchange, not so much a formal process like this, so we can get directly to those questions and what you can do to implement the approach we've taken here. And that can take multiple forms. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach out to us at info@ fundforlakegeorge.org, or simply calling our number 518-668-9700. We're all available. You can reach us all on our website as well. And there's a lot more to learn about the SALT initiative at the fund website, fundforlakegeorge.org. John mentioned, please stay tuned. We will be having this was a springboard really to our next SALT summit. It'll be our 6th, which is being planned for the last week in September. You're all on our list, so we will keep you posted as we secure that date. And we really look forward to seeing you at the summit, hopefully in person. But I have to say, this has worked so well, and we're, again, so grateful for your interest, for your own leadership in carrying the ball forward and reducing the use. Until then, until we meet again one way or another, please be safe and be well. Thank you.